Welcome to everyone who's joined us today. This is the South African Chamber of Commerce. I'm Sharon Constanson, Chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce based here in the UK. Coming out of the summer months and into September has proven to be an extremely busy month with key individuals of interest and members of our community really interested in some of the unusual events that we've been able to put on already since the new season has started. And today is another very, very interesting event, where we're going to be talking about the digital world in a way that I think will be unique to many of us. Our Zoom has allowed us to get access to speakers from all over the globe. And today we have a Belgian Afrikaner in the Free State and being chatted to in conversation with another gentleman who happens to also be in the Free State. But we had speakers recently in the series from New York, for example. And if we look at a series we had last week on ESG with people from 2 or 3 continents that were joining us. So we do manage to reach a speaker delegation that you could never otherwise achieve without Zoom. And today we actually have the ability also to reach a much wider audience. And I thank all of those who have arrived today. I think we've got about 3 continents at least being represented so far, I can see in the group. The Q&A function is available to be used. Please, by all means, place your questions. They will be picked up by the profs and they will be looking at them, building them into their conversations accordingly. So please do use the Q&A function. This is a very relaxed hour that we're going to spend together, where the professor from the university will be in conversation with a professor from one of the parts of the university. So as our next one in our Courageous Conversations webinars, we want to tease out the key issues that are relevant to our global world and to our global citizens, and that is the world of digital. It's something we worry about on boards in companies. We worry about transfer information from old systems to new systems, but I think we might get a different perspective today. And in the words of Professor Francis Petersen, he says he wishes through his new area within the university to infuse the natural and social sciences and the humanities with everything that digital brings, the multidisciplinary approach, in order to solve real-world problems through the power of big data analysis. Professor Francis Petersen, who is well known to many of you present today, has run and led all these events for us. His guest is Professor Philippe Burger, who will share some of the digital insights that he has. 2 of his colleagues are with us in the audience as well, and thank them for attending at the same time. Professor Francis William Petersen is the Rector and Vice-Chancellor of the University of the Free State and has held that role since 2017. Prior to that, he was Vice-Chancellor of the Deputy Vice-Chancellor in the University of Cape Town, and he also worked at the Cape Technicon. His private life took him to Anglo-American Platinum and Mintech, and he's won the Ernest Oppenheimer Memorial Trust and Cape Technicon Researcher of the Year awards. He originally studied at Stellenbosch. I think they might be angry with you still, sir. At this point, Francis, as I would like to call you, I'd like to hand over to you and for you to do the work over the next hour and to enjoy teasing out from Philippe some of the key points of interest to our audience. I'll hand over to both of you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And good afternoon to all of the delegates that's here this afternoon. I can recall in our first conversation, and that was a conversation that I had with Sharon on this particular platform. I've explained the concept of a global citizen, and within that concept, within the concept of a global citizen, I also teased out a bit the concept of a corporate citizen. Now, I refer to that the global citizen has an awareness and understanding of the world as a world that are interconnected, but also an understanding of the different cultures that operates in the world. So when we talk about the world, we want to think that the world is a world that is going to be a fair world, a fairer world, a socially just world, a safe world, a prosperous world, I would assume, and also a more equitable world. I also have indicated in those discussions that COVID-19 has given us a stark reminder of the need to rethink our identity, of where we belong, and in fact to challenge and rethink the normative view of citizen or in citizenship. It was really about, as I explained during those earlier sessions, it's about values, individual values. It's about empathy, and probably it's about building bridges. And having reflect on our earlier sessions, it reminds me of the current ladies American Open champion Emma Raducanu. Her father is Romanian, and she speaks Romanian fluently, but never lived in Romania. But during the Open, you could see the Romanians and also on Twitter, the support that she has received from the Romanian nation. Her mother is Chinese, and she speaks Chinese fluently. And I can also imagine the support that she has received from the Chinese nation during that final. She was born in Canada, and she lived most of her life in the UK. So when we talk about global citizens, those are probably the elements that we had in mind and that we should think and reflect on when we talk about the global citizen. Now, we can't talk about global citizen and global citizenship without unpacking and understanding in fact talk about the global challenges. We've got the climate change challenge, the energy, and the just transition. I think there's a lot of discussion at this moment in time, specifically leading up to the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, potentially the creation of a global fund that could assist with the just transition. We got the public health challenge, and we've dealt with COVID and still dealing with COVID, but there are other public health challenges that we need to tackle. And then there are the digital futures. Uh, uh, um, and the digital futures is not only about technology, it's really about the responsible technological innovation that goes with it. And we often, and as Sharon has indicated, that these challenges that we talked about are, of course, multidisciplinary of nature. There isn't one discipline that can resolve or can contribute solutions to this challenge. You have to work interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and to a certain extent, potentially also transdisciplinary. So today, we will talk about the digital divide and how in our digital future, we need to ensure that the digital divide does not become a digital chasm. And with that, a little bit of introduction, uh, um, Philippe Burger, a professor at the University of the Free State, is Vice Dean, Deputy Dean in the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences, but he's also Pro-Vice-Chancellor looking after poverty, inequality, and economic development. So welcome, Philippe. And I want to kick off a question by asking you, how should we understand the differences between multi, inter, and transdisciplinarity, especially with respect to closing that digital divide?
Good afternoon, and also good afternoon to everybody in the audience. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today. I think, while multidisciplinarity brings perspectives from various disciplines into play, interdisciplinarity integrates these perspectives. But then we can go a bit further to transdisciplinarity, where we're not only integrating these perspectives from multiple disciplines, but we sort of transcend them into something new, an encompassing perspective that brings us new insights that we would not have otherwise had. And for me, a beautiful way this is summarized was done by Sir Peter Gluckman a week and a half ago. He's the new president-elect of the International Science Council. And in his speech, he talks about transdisciplinarity. And he says that basically it means that from the initial stages, we frame questions that we look at through multiple lenses simultaneously. So it's not just that you look at, you use one lens of, let's say, sociology, and then another lens looking at it from natural science perspective. You look through all these lenses simultaneously. And that I think summarizes what we want to do with transdisciplinarity specifically. And a lot of the problems, as you mentioned in the introduction, that we deal with today are problems that are transdisciplinary in nature. The whole COVID crisis is one such an example. So yes, it is a viral infection, and it is a medical problem once people get ill. So that, of course, needs medical research, but there are so many other dimensions to it. For instance, if I think back to when the crisis started in New York, so I lived for 9 months in New York 5 years ago, and you come to know the various boroughs of New York pretty well, and then you realize that particularly in poorer boroughs, like in the Bronx, the COVID crisis was much more severe because a much larger proportion of the population there are frontline workers, are exposed to the virus. So and are also much poorer. So once we want to look at how to deal with it, we need a multidisciplinary and a transdisciplinary approach. Also, if you think about today, the vaccine hesitancy issues and so on, all of that requires views on politics, on religion, on constitutional law, etc. Now, the digital divide is something similar. It is not just a matter of taking a helicopter and going to drop all the devices and tech, in places in Africa and Asia and Latin America. It is something much more, and it's about skills, it's about education, it's about politics, and we need to all of that to understand the digital divide, but also to solve it. For that, we will also need management skills, financial skills. We need to understand something about culture, etc. So all of that is something that we need, and I think also that will go together with our, a much or increased shift to what we call open science, where we will be putting data on open repositories so that people from both the high income countries and low and middle income countries can all work together on these data bases. So the research is transparent and can be published in open access journals, etc. But all of that is what we will need in a more transparent era and a more transdisciplinary era that we approach when we go to a digital future.
Okay, no, but that gives us a very good insight in terms of the different skill sets that is necessary to resolve and tackle this digital divide. But I would imagine you referred to COVID-19 a little bit earlier, Philippe. But the divide became even more apparent during the COVID-19 pandemic, didn't it?
Indeed it did. And I think it became much more apparent. So if you think about it, kids in the UK, in Europe and in the US, they were able to migrate online fairly swiftly. And that allowed their schools to limit the negative impact of COVID on education. But most kids in low-income countries and even middle-income countries were not so lucky. They have very limited, if any, access to digital devices, to networks, to data. So hence, they experienced a complete breakdown of their schooling. And and what's more is that, because of the low levels of vaccination in many low-income countries, in Africa, the rates of vaccination is still below 5% of the population. This disruption will be much longer and much deeper than in high-income countries. So even possibly 2 or 3 times as long. So, while Europe and the US and so on are already looking at returning to normal this year, it might be the case that many of the poorer countries might only be able to return to normal in 2022, 2023, even 2024, depending on the rate at which they vaccinate. So that is a real issue. In South Africa, for instance, the NITS-CRAM study, a NITS-CRAM study done by Shepard and Mohlwane, they found that as much as 10% of kids did not return to school since the COVID pandemic started. And they found that, compared to normal times, there are between 400,000 and 500,000 children between the ages of 7 and 17 who were not attending school by 2021, May 2021. So, because of the digital divide, this impact of COVID on education is deeper and much more protracted in low and even middle income countries. And that is in addition to something else. I read this morning a tweet by Carlos Lopez when he tweeted that there are 25 countries in Africa with less than 30% of their adult population possessing secondary education. So that sort of aggravates the problem further and points to the need to really make a big effort, a global effort, to overcome these divides.
Very interesting. So I want to pull it a little bit more in terms of economic development. So do you think the digital divide have a real economic consequence? Are there consequences economically?
Yeah, I think to understand that, I think we need to think a bit about what we so easily talk about inclusive economic growth. And I think we need to understand what we mean by inclusive economic growth, but within the context of the digital future and within a world where there is a digital divide. Because if we have an economic divide that is driven by a digital divide, then we have to overcome that digital divide to also overcome that economic divide. Now, so when we talk about what we mean by inclusive growth, so we usually think about that it means that people share in the benefits of economic growth. But there are 2 ways you can do that. There's for that growth to be inclusive. The one is, of course, through grants. And that is a path that South Africa has walked. There's last week came out a study that has shown that the pre-tax income in South Africa that gap has widened significantly. But we have largely narrowed it after tax and after grants and after all the what we call social wage, all the money that is going to education and health. But that is not an ideal way to have people share in growth, and it's not what I would think is true inclusive growth. For growth to be truly inclusive, I would think that we need to also have people contribute to production. Because if you're employed, or if you employ and you are, an entrepreneur and you partake in production, that means that you will get an income. And if that income is fair and you share that way in the benefit of growth, that is something that is much more inclusive. Now, to take part in production in a digital age requires skills, and I think in a digital era, this also means digital skills. It means STEM skills, your science, technology, engineering, mathematics skills. It also, these days, it requires people to code, to have some skills in robotics. I read recently a study by the Royal Bank of Canada, And they found that 70% of all jobs in Canada require some level of mathematical skills. So that means that if we want to take part in the digital era in entrepreneurship and in production and so on, we will have to close that digital divide. We have to overcome that. It also reminds me, a decade ago, we had these terms where we distinguish between digital immigrants and digital natives. And so people like us who were born before 1975, we largely grew up without computers and in our homes. And we came to it later in life, hence we are called digital immigrants. But, the children born in the 80s and 90s and so on, they are supposed to have grown up with all of this technology, with computers, etc. So to them, they are natives in the land of IT and in the land of the digital. The problem, though, is that with the digital divide, that most children in Africa, in many parts of Asia, in Latin America, they're still digital immigrants. They have not yet immigrated to the land of the digital. In fact, I think we can even say that they are digital foreigners, totally or partially excluded from this digital future. And I think this holds true for most of Africa, for large parts of Asia, Latin America. And the danger is that, and that goes against the inclusive growth, is that we will end up being mere importers of digital goods. We will be the consumers, we will be digital consumers, not digital producers. And so I think that if we do not become digital producers, economic growth in the digital era will largely remain exclusive, not inclusive. And so to conclude that, I think STEM skills, management, digital skills, these are cumulative skills. It's not interchangeable. You add layer by layer as you learn. And the problem is that we run the risk that these digital gaps will grow, and that large parts of the world, will be left behind. And that, as you mentioned in the introduction, that this digital divide will become a digital chasm, and we will reach a point where it feel almost impossible to traverse it.
So Philippe, so you mentioned all of these challenges. I don't know whether I'm a digital immigrant or digital native, but how can we overcome the digital divide in Africa, but also in other low-income countries then?
Yeah, that is a very good question. And I think what we need is, a moonshot approach that is focused and driven. And for those of you, for our audience today who attended the previous session by Jeff Sachs, will remember he also talked about a moonshot approach, where it is a concept that I basically borrow from him, where he applies it to the reduction of poverty and to solve issues like climate change and so on. It is a concept that originated from the 1960s, when President Kennedy announced the US's intention to go to the moon and back within or before the end of the decade. And a lot of people thought that was crazy. It's impossible. How can we do that? We haven't even really gone out of the atmosphere. Now you talk about going to the moon. But he just said, no, let's push on for this, on this, and let's get some focus of purpose, and let's put money into it to achieve this goal. And they achieved what many thought was the impossible. And I think we need something similar for education and to close this digital divide. We need an extraordinary approach, a singular approach, a singular focus that to close this divide. And for that, I think we will need a partnership between governments of the countries involved, both rich and poor. But that partnership will also include education specialists, people who specialize in pedagogy and all of that. We need tech specialists, and we need finance specialists.
So Philippe, if I want to push you here a little bit, uh, um, and to be to move more concretely. So how do we do that then? You mentioned about all of these things that we need to have a moonshot approach, a singular focus, a partnership, but how do we actually get it off the ground?
Yeah, I think we need to be aspirational. So, we talk about a digital future. So let's be aspirational. Let's be a bit futuristic in this digital world of ours that we want to create and that we need. So I think that if we look at this digital divide, where it is a case of lots of children who do not have this sort of access, I do think that we can use digital technology to actually overcome this divide, to solve this problem. This problem where we have too many people who do not have digital skills, STEM skills, and in low-income countries. And so one might ask, so, we do not have these digital capacity within countries. And now here I come and I say, well, let's use the digital to do that. But so what am I actually saying here? Well, I think let's first of all get an idea of the problem. So for decades, we threw money and we threw a lot of efforts where we tried to create a model of trying to expand the pool of teachers in low-income countries, teachers with the mathematics skills, the science skills, etc. And to teach kids who were in and still are in far-flung rural areas. We built schools, but then, the pool of skilled teachers just couldn't expand fast enough. So that means that progress remains limited. As I cited Carlos Lopez earlier, 30%, less than 30% of adults in 30 countries, or no, it's the other way around, 25 countries with 30% or less of adults have these skills or finished the high school. That is a big gap to overcome, and so we need something extraordinary. And this, in the face of a divide that only grows. So I'm thinking that we need to digitalize education in low-income countries to traverse this digital divide. So we already digitized teaching materials, so we put textbooks on PDF. But that is merely, as they say, putting paper behind glass. So then we have already learning management systems, or LMSs as it's called in education. We have that at universities and at schools and so on. And these are platforms where students and teachers can interact using all sorts of interactive teaching materials and online classes and videos and so on. But I think that all of that is still not fully immersive enough. What we need to do is I think we need to create that fully immersive platform. And I truly believe that the way to do that is to use augmented and virtual reality technology, that will bring children and teachers right into a virtual reality classroom. So at the moment, these things are very expensive and very clunky. I mean, if you think about putting a virtual reality set of goggles on your head, it really feels like a motorcycle helmet on your head. It is very heavy, and some of the imaging, it still needs a lot of work to give you that real world feel. So we don't need so much virtual reality goggles as we need virtual reality glasses. These need to be lightweight so that while you are interacting and these things are on your face, you forget that you have something on your head. It's like normal glasses that you go on with your daily tasks without thinking every second that there's something that you're looking at or through. Now, with such virtual reality glasses, the learner and the teacher will be able to put these glasses on and be in the class. This will ensure a fully immersive experience for learners. They will be literally in the class, and even though this class is virtual. I'm even thinking a bit beyond that. I think that for some topics, we already have what we call AI bots that deal with question and answers. There's no reason why this technology can't develop into 5 or 10 years in terms of AI teachers. but more than the technology, it's not just a matter of technology and dropping the technology in poor countries. I think we have to adopt our pedagogy to use such classrooms. We need to ensure that these kids participate, that they interact, that they feel that they have agency, that they have choice in what they learn from a very early age on, so that learning backlogs do not develop. And given that a lot of these kids live in rural areas where there's little electricity supply, you also need to develop tech to deal with that. So you'll need tech specialists that look at how to power these devices, possibly through localized solar technology. So there's a lot of work, and as you can see, it comes from a lot of sciences, a lot of disciplines. It's really transdisciplinary. And all of that needs to go in developing the pedagogy, in miniaturizing the technology. But given the current state of technology, I really do believe that this is feasible. I do not think that this is a Star Trek futurism or a sci-fi fantasy. It is within reach. I don't think it's unrealistic or a fantasy to think that such technology can exist within the next decade. Just imagine, how far we came in the last decade, or even in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, if I wanted to participate in a meeting overseas, it was a big setup with video conferencing, and I had to book the video conferencing facility. Today, we are here sitting on a platform on Zoom where everybody from 3 continents link up. And that's just 5 years. So, we can do much more in 5 years, where we make such technology much more accessible. But I think we need to, this is a twofold process. The first one is the upfront investment, and that is the expensive part, because you need to bring governments of the countries involved. You need education specialists, tech specialists, finance specialists. You need all of them to create this technology, to design the pedagogy, and then they need to pilot the combination of tech and pedagogy. So, as I said, this is very expensive. But it's like solar panels. 10 years ago, it was still very, very expensive. Today, it's cheaper than coal. So we need to make that financial investment to make it viable in the longer run. The second phase of this twofold process is then, once this technology and pedagogy exists, is then we need to scale it. And we need to scale that production to reduce unit costs to levels that will make the price affordable for mass rollout in the poorest and remotest parts of this world. And that will be the rollout phase. And there will, of course, be a bit of an overlap between these two phases, or these two processes. But you can see again that we draw together multiple disciplines, and it requires looking at the problem through multiple lenses simultaneously, to use Peter Gluckman's turn of phrase, and that will pull in the social and the natural sciences.
Well, that's quite a mouthful there, Philippe. But who will play a role in this?
I think it's 4 big players. The first one is of course the governments of countries. You can't just go into a country and do this without the consent and the cooperation of the government to create a system like this. Then you need your education and your tech companies. I think there will be a huge market for these companies once you develop a product that is affordable and can be rolled out. I think also involved in this partnership would be universities, because that's where the pedagogical experts are, where some of the technical experts are. And last but not least, and I want to focus a bit on this, is the global financial providers. So. And this is a lesson that I've also learned from the COVID crisis. So in the COVID crisis, we have developed vaccines, and we have the expertise and to for instance, develop logistic systems to distribute vaccines. But the big question is, who will finance the distribution of vaccines to poor countries? And the same is true in this case. So we need to look at a funding model that to some extent works. And you, in the beginning, you talked about the global fund also for climate change. And we already have a global fund internationally to deal with illnesses like malaria and TB and AIDS in low-income countries. And that fund it doesn't have all the funding it needs, but it goes quite a long way to deal with some of the challenges. So, and that fund is, as I said, called the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. What we, in this case, I would argue, need is a global fund to close the digital divide. Now, as is the case with the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, a global fund to close the digital divide will depend on funding from high-income countries, the governments, but also from high net worth philanthropists. Somebody like Bill Gates played a big role in the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and malaria, donating a lot of money. I think we need similar money donations from philanthropists, and I'll give you a sort of an example here. So, in the last few months, we've seen people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and all these guys go to outer space. And a lot of that needs digital skills to program these rockets and to manage them. It's digital. And to bring that sort of future that they represent there, that they bring there, it would help if guys like that would also help to fund through their philanthropic works a global fund that will help to close this digital divide. But there's also other ways to think about the financing here. Such a fund can also use all sorts of innovative financing methods, like social impact bonds, development impact bonds that we see in the private sector. There's also, a long-run bonds that such a fund can issue that pay a return that is linked to the loans weighted average of the GDP growth rates of the countries in which these funds are put. So why would I talk about that? Well, because education is supposed to increase your growth rate. People like Hanucek and Bushman, their research has shown that the quality of education is directly linked, positively linked to growth rates. It's not so much the years of education that you are, years of schooling that determine economic growth rate. It's the quality of education. So if we can introduce the sort of digital skills and so on in our education at schools, that will have a direct impact on growth rates, and that way you can link the financing to the growth rates. We already have GDP growth bonds where the interest rate paid is linked to the growth rate of the countries. We can do so now in a fund that spreads the risk over a number of countries to deal with this. But we can also think about things like, in South Africa, we talk a lot about so-called climate bonds. So as many people would know, Eskom is in trouble, and it basically has too many coal-fired power stations, and now they need to expand their electricity generating power. And one of the things that we heard is that yes, you can get financing, but this needs to come in the form of a climate bond where you undertake then also to reduce your coal-fired power generation. I think we need a similar type of bond, and let's call it an education and digital education bond that will help countries, to say, okay, we can finance these things, but on condition that you use it specifically to teach children in STEM skills, in digital skills, and so on. So I think there are various options that we can talk about.
Okay. So Philippe, what investment attitude will it take? And I know you summarize a lot of these potential mechanisms and vehicles, but there need to be investment attitude that needs to be there. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, so we talk, and Sharon also talks about ESG becoming more and more part of companies and what they do, and so and it's the triple bottom line and all of that. So today it's the bottom line is important, and the next quarter's return is important, but I think we will to close this digital gap, this digital divide, requires from us to lift our gaze, from the next quarter's return to the next quarter century's return. And this is not unprecedented. People already, people in their 20s and 30s, save with an eye on, not on next year, but on providing for retirement in 30 or 40 years' time. So, as I think as long as the cumulative compounded in return on this education and this investment, if that is that investment to bridge this digital divide over 20 or 25 years, if that return is high enough and exceeds the return that will be earned in the absence of such investments, then it's worthwhile. But it does require a longer horizon, a longer investment horizon. It's almost like in a sort of a growth portfolio that you will be investing, but a long-term growth portfolio. So we need to think carefully here, and we need to devise the right investment vehicles so that the risk is diversified, so that your investment is not just tied up with what is happening in one country, but is that investors, global investors who invest in this, that it is spread over a number of countries, and the risk is diversified. Now, people might say, yes, but shouldn't we be a bit skeptical about all of this? Is this not unrealistic? But I would argue now, put ourselves in 1990 or even in the year 2000, when we thought about China. If we didn't invest in China at the time, and we left China poor, and we didn't bring China into the world economy, where would we have been today? The growth that we've seen in China, and even in places like India, that has lifted between 1 and 2 billion people out of poverty in a very, very short period of time. We need something similar now, but for Africa. And if I again look at China, what did they do? To do this, they invested in education. They sent their students to the US to study engineering and management and so on. And it was very competitive to do that. It's only the top 1% of graduates in China who could actually do that. So we need to create something similar in Africa and in parts of Latin America and in other parts of Asia and so on. The challenge is a bit more though, so, in China, they only had to overcome the third industrial revolution gap, and they could do that and then participate fully in creating the fourth industrial revolution, and you see that today, just this week when you see the controversy of Huawei's, the founder of Huawei's daughter being kept prisoner in Canada and then sent back to China and all of that. So China is in the front of that race these days. But you wouldn't have predicted that 20 or 30 years ago. So it is, again, I think this is a divide that can be overcome with the right amount of physical capital, infrastructure, but also human capital. And here too, I think it's important to say, so China very often talks about they want to invest in the so-called Belt and Road Initiative, which is sort of a recreation, a modern recreation of the Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road. But I think in today's world, we need something more. And rich countries, China, but also to a large extent now, China, but also the US, Europe, the UK. What we need is not just a Belt and Road Initiative. I think what we need is a brains and digital initiative to accompany a Belt and Road Initiative. And only that way can you grow in low-income countries, and can you ensure that growth is ultimately inclusive in a digital era.
Right, Philippe, I think you really have sort of summarized and provided a good context of the importance of the digital era. of the digital future. The center that you just have created at the University of the Free State, which is called the Interdisciplinary Centre for Digital Futures. How do you see the future of the center in terms of what you just described, closing that digital divide? And more so, if we talk about a global citizen, what role will it play in the betterment of society, say 5 years or 10 years from now?
Yes, so the center that we just created, I think it will focus mainly on three things. The first is on agriculture. We should remember that we are in Africa, but agriculture today is not the agriculture of, you know, my one grandfather, my South African grandfather was a farmer. And, you know, it's not the type of farming that you will see today. Today, farming is very capital intensive. You know, people are always very surprised when they hear that after the electricity generating sector in South Africa, agriculture is the most capital intensive sector, more so than mining and manufacturing. It's a very capital intensive industry today. But, you know, in South Africa, it plays a big role. You know, during COVID, it was the only sector that actually grew. And it is still growing, you know, it's still a sector that grows. But we need to go beyond South Africa. We need to go into Africa. And that is what the center also wants to look at. You know, we are a university in the global South. And we need to take up our responsibility in that context. So specifically things we want to look at there is things like enterprise architecture, and particularly the integration of environment, social, and governance principles into this architecture to support, you know, really everyday decision making, but not just, you know, it's not just a checkbox that you tick at the end of a financial year. It needs to be really integrated into what is done in agricultural firms on the top, in the middle management, on lower management, etc. And then we also want to adapt it to scale so that it can be used by a spectrum of farmers, you know, ranging from your global agricultural companies, you know, what we call in South Africa your mega farmers. You know, 20% of agricultural output in South Africa is produced by 80% of farmers, and 20% of farmers produce 80% of output. So those 20% of farmers who are really the big agricultural companies. But then also on the other end of the scale, your small scale farmers, your emerging farmers, your farmers in communal land areas. So one wants technology that can also help them. And again here, you know, I think what this center wants to do is to bring together the natural sciences and the social sciences, because, you know, we don't want to just bring a helicopter approach and dump tech to, let's say, emerging farmers and farmers in communal land areas. We need sociologists, anthropologists, and so on to go and engage with those farmers to find out what it is that they really need, and to adapt the technology to that, to those needs. So that's in agriculture. The second area we are looking at is medicine. You know, so and we've seen that also now with COVID. You know, and one of our co-directors is already involved with modeling of COVID trends in the Free State province. You know, so we have these big data lakes that allow for the use of big data analysis and statistics that can be used on that. So I think in medicine, there's a lot of potential there. And then thirdly, you know, what I've been talking about earlier, education and the digital divide. You know, so we want to look at how to close that digital divide. And that includes the hardware aspects of it, you know, your virtual reality technology, but also the software aspects, how to incorporate pedagogy into all of this. You know, so we want to do all of that together. What we've started to do also is to put together, you know, international teams. So we are looking at partnering with people in the BRICS countries. So we've already start building partnerships with experts in India, in Russia. An hour ago, one of our people also received an invitation to attend a conference on this in Russia, middle of next year, in Brazil, and so on. So we have those sort of links that we work on. But our links are also with the global north. We have partnerships, the university with universities in Germany and Austria. We have an Austrian partner where they already look at virtual reality and eye tracking technology that's built into all of that. And then I think we want to say that it's not just academic partnerships we are looking at, but also business partnerships, and we want to do that in all sorts of countries, including the UK.
Right. So we got about 5 minutes left, so you talk about what the center is going to be doing and is currently doing already, but you also want to create a futuristic space, I believe, Philippe, the so-called co-creation laboratory. And co-creation is effectively bringing all of those partners that you talked about together with academia, and then start to co-create some of those solutions. But why does a center for digital futures, being digital after all, require a physical location in which to work?
That's a very, very good question. So we come after 18 months now of remote work, and particularly since the outbreak of COVID. And I think if there's one thing we've noticed is that we also need a co-creation space, or what we call a co-creation lab. And why is that? A week or a half ago, the media reported on a study done by researchers from Microsoft and Berkeley University, where they looked at the behavior of 61,000 Microsoft workers. Okay, so these are workers in the tech industry. And they looked at their behavior before and after the switch to remote work following the emergence of COVID. And what the study found was that workers engaged less with co-workers outside their teams. So their teams, they have weekly meetings, and they get to know there's almost a high increased engagement with their team members, but outside their teams, there's much lower levels of engagement, and also much lower levels of engagement with new workers. And there's also much lower collaboration across teams. So, and as I said, this is a case of a firm that is on the forefront of digital technology. If there's now one firm in the world that one would have expected to be able to work perfectly in a digital space, permanently offline, it would be something like a Microsoft, but no. So, and the lack of collaboration across teams is especially bad in settings where we want to foster transdisciplinary research, because transdisciplinary research presupposes that we transcend boundaries and that we work across teams and departments and faculties and companies and so on. So with that as an objective, we need to create a physical space where that can happen. Now, by saying a physical space, I'm not denying that this can't work with a flexible work model that allows workers to work part of the week, from home, or we also need, but what I'm arguing is that we also need them to work in the office, to collaborate, to be creative together. And I think it's important to understand that, even though we might become a very digital world in a digital future, we are human beings, and we still crave that face-to-face interaction. And it has to do with, we want to see the other person's body language, and we take a lot of subconscious cues from body language. And for that, we can't just speak to a dot on a screen. So, and also, intra-organizational networking, very often that across teams and so on, that happens over coffee breaks and lunch breaks, and it happens in face-to-face brainstorming sessions. So, that does not mean that we should not adopt a flexible work model, only that we should schedule enough face time at the office to ensure that this bonding office culture is created and that we get those creative juices flowing. And that is basically what we want to do with this co-creative lab. in our co-creative lab, we want a sensory experience environment that stimulates creativity in our creative co-creation teams. You know, almost like a Google Office setup. And the co-creation lab will bring together all these creatives, these creative people from academia, but also the private sector in these teams. And in this co-creative lab, they will also have, you know, all the digital toys that will help to spur their creativity and teamwork. So I think it's a mix, but certainly we want a physical space to do all of that.
Okay. Philippe, it was a fantastic conversation. There are some questions in the chat box. I think some of that has been answered. Others we're not going to get to. But ultimately, I think what you're bringing across is this Interdisciplinary Centre for Digital Futures, in fact, will create solutions in the future application space, whether it's agriculture, whether it's medicine, whether it's mining, whether it's finance. It's about digital futures in those sectors, and we will co-create solutions where the ecosystem exists between private sector, industry, commerce, universities, the community, and then obviously bringing into that the human-centered approach by balancing and integrating, not balancing, integrating social and humanities, social sciences and humanities, and the natural and technical sciences. So fantastic, Philippe. In the audience, Sharon, we also have the two co-directors of the centers, interim co-directors Katinka Davet and Herkulaas Combrink, and they are so passionate. So yeah, so what's the space? And I can see there's going to be a lot of development happening in this interdisciplinary center. Sharon, over to you.
One of the things that you gentlemen in the academia will definitely have is a way with words that I'm not even going to try and compete with. It's absolutely amazing, just the eloquence and the summing up. So, Prof, I'm not going to try and sum up again because you've just done a fantastic version of it. But what I would like to just pick up on a couple of words that I found quite interesting. One of them, Philippe, you talked about the public-private partnerships, and one of the individuals on the chat line is saying, is digital one of the potential spurring on points that could actually get the country to start doing genuine public-private partnerships? And is this not something that has another dimension of value to it that we should be promoting, which I think is really interesting? Parts I found interesting as well were the bits where you were talking about the different kinds of funding options that are available, where it's not trying to fund from one place, you're funding from everywhere. And that, as we know, that sort of viral approach to things definitely gives you a different outcome. I love the moonshot. I think I took a lovely photograph of the moon. I didn't know that a moonshot was something different. I thought it was just a photograph, you see. So yeah, I'm not as academic as you guys are, but I have to say I did really enjoy Jeremy Sachs. It was very, very interesting. But the digital divide, I do worry, because we talk about the variances, the differences, the diversity, the gaps, and how the risk at the moment globally of what Francis was talking about is, please, we don't want them to be chasms, but we see the risks in many countries' behavior that you alluded to, either because of their vaccination strategy, their investment strategy, their manufacturing strategy, their personal strategy towards being vaccinated. You know, there are all these things that are standing in the way of narrowing the gap and creating a bigger gap. And the statistics was shared last week in connection with the number of children in South Africa alone that have not returned to school because of the COVID pandemic. And you're talking hundreds of thousands, 500,000 odd, I think was the number, the children that have just got lost in the system. And can they ever be found again? But I have to share one little quick thing as I close is, I was very confused by the title. I'm a foreign exchange trader who deals in futures. What kind of future is this? What date are you going to trade for? How much is the contract note? And then, of course, I got intelligent and I listened to you and realized that's not what you were talking about. But that's just jokes aside. For us people who come from different worlds, how different words can mean different things to different people. And it's so easy to misinterpret things. Not that I quite was that bad, but I was very curious to see what you were going to talk about in something I had a completely different meaning for. And I'd like to thank you, Philippe. You were absolutely amazing. I thoroughly enjoyed your insights and the variety and new words. I had to go look up a word or two. You academics confuse me. So I had to go look up a word or two and say, what does it really mean? Oh, it just means that you're going to teach them in a certain mechanism. Okay, right, now I understand pedagogy. But I had to go and just have a quick look to make sure I hadn't completely lost the plot. But thanks to both of you, it was thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyable. We have got the questions here, so if there's anything we feel we've not addressed, we will pick up with the individuals in question. And Francis, as always, sitting from that beautiful armchair, so cool, cat and casual. It's lovely to listen to the depth of insight of your questions. And more importantly, like one of your students has said, and one of the media people from the Free State recently, at some point in time, it said, wow, how amazing to see what you are doing for the university and for the economy and the community around your university. So I congratulate you on what you're achieving, and both of you now, because you're both from the university as well. So thanks to everybody. Thanks to everyone else for staying. We've had a good turnout today, and we look forward to the recording, which will be watched by usually 2-3 times as many people who have attended. Thank you.
For having
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.